I'm Rachel.
And I'm Lauren.
Welcome back to Capital Conversations with Rachel and Lauren.
This week we'll be talking about the House's Canada tariff vote and Pam Bondi's testimony. After that, we have a conversation with Congressman Jeff Hurd, and we'll answer all of your questions about our lives on the Hill.
Hello, everybody. Happy late Valentine's Day and happy President's Day to all who celebrate. You know, think of George Washington twice a day. Do you know people say that the average American thinks of Abraham Lincoln at least once a day?
I surely don't.
I don't either.
So and I work in politics.
Yeah, so maybe we're bad. But that's okay because we have a lot of stuff to talk about today that isn't, unfortunately, about past presidents, but we do have some stuff to talk about current presidents, so we will get into that. I think the thing that last week struck me as one of those rare moments where we're like, oh, this GOP trifecta is not as strong as we sometimes think it is. It was this vote that they took to repeal President Trump's tariffs on Canada. And I think that was a vote that was very important. And I don't know if a lot of people have been paying attention to the tariffs in Congress because there was that ban for so long in the House that bills to repeal the tariffs were not allowed to come up for a vote. But then that ban expired, and then Democrats were able to bring these bills up for a vote. And so I think that what that did is it forced Republicans to kind of take a look and see whether or not they wanted to adhere to the Constitution or whether they wanted to go along with President Trump. And in the end, 7 Republicans voted to repeal the tariffs along with all the Democrats.
Yeah, and I would say that honestly, our average listener, or even us before we started reporting on Congress, I don't think I necessarily knew how tariffs work or what tariff or who tariff power fell under, if it fell under the executive or the legislative. But the Constitution does give Congress the power over tariffs. And obviously, President Trump has taken a lot of tariff power into his own hands. And we've seen a lot of Republicans fall in line and support him in that. But there was a small handful of defections. And as we've said it 1 million times, a razor slim majority, the smallest majority in history. That is a hard thing that is going to be Democrats are going to be using this very often. They're a privileged resolution, and so somebody in the minority can bring up these votes to repeal these tariffs. And so I think that with a lot of them, we are going to see like a handful of Republicans here or a different handful of Republicans here. A lot of people in the Midwest don't love tariffs. It affects a lot of farmers, which is why a lot of members who will vote to repeal these will point at that, like you see a Don Bacon or a Kevin Kiley of California, or like we said, Jeff Hurd, who we have on this this show today. Yeah, I think it's just going to be like very situation by situation on each one, but Democrats are definitely going to take this and run with it. It's a good way for them to bring stuff forward in the minority and to put Republicans on record.
And what I think is interesting to me about last week's vote was not even just the final passage vote where 7 Republicans decided to repeal the tariffs. It was the vote that was taken the day prior, which was this procedural vote called a rule, which basically just you go and vote and you unlock the gate to be able to go to final passage. And so typically it's a party line vote. We've talked about this, I think, before that, you know, if it's a Republican majority, Republicans will vote for it, Democrats will vote against it, vice versa. And so what had happened was that 3 Republicans voted with all Democrats to tank the rule. And by tanking the rule, what that did is it basically eliminated GOP leadership's ability to extend this ban that I had said prior about not allowing these votes to come up. And a lot of Democrats have been really upset about that. President Trump put out this national emergency about Canada tariffs February of last year. Democrats immediately filed a resolution. They wanted to vote on the House floor. As you said, they are big proponents of, you know, Constitution, leg branch has their powers, executive branch has theirs. And so those resolutions were blocked. And we have a lot of them that are coming down the pipeline. We have some to repeal Mexico tariffs, Brazil. And then when President Trump did his widespread 10% Liberation Day tariffs, these are all measures that Democrats and, as we've seen, some Republicans want to have a vote on. And you'll hear from Jeff Hurd later about just the institution behind it is why a lot of these members are doing it. They're not doing it because they don't respect President Trump or they don't respect his agenda. It's more of like a lot of members come to Congress because they are strict constitutionalists, and the bleeding of the lines here is, I think, making some Republicans take some uncomfortable votes.
Yeah, and I mean, you saw a lot more Republicans vote to repeal that than you saw tank the rule. The reason that Democrats don't vote on the rule is because it's really strictly procedural. It's just kind of to show party loyalty or show I don't know. I don't really necessarily
I don't know why
like,
they do it. It's such a, I mean, I get it. I mean, we're sitting up here talking about constitutional powers and stuff. I know why they do a rule vote.
Yes.
It's just, it causes so much headache. And
It
with
does.
the razor with the majorities, I mean, you do as the speaker have the power to not put things under a rule. You can just put it under what it's called suspension. But a lot of members don't like that because they want to take that party line vote, because then when it comes up under suspension, you know, if the bill passes with majority Democratic support, that doesn't look good for a Republican speaker.
Yeah, to bring something up under suspension, it has to reach 2/3 vote instead of just a simple majority of 50%. And so that's where issues come in. We saw stuff with Kevin McCarthy being ousted because he had Democrats vote with his conference. Lots of procedural stuff.
Lots of trauma.
Yes, lots of procedural stuff that honestly the average person doesn't really need to know about, like, in the trenches. But they do like to tack on this language, like where they barred any language coming to the floor on these tariffs into a rule. That is a pretty big, I would say, difference of this Congress. It's kind of newer to use the Rules Committee in this way to get around stuff or to bar stuff. But it's been very popular, this conference. We saw it with, they wanted to use it with proxy voting or Epstein stuff. Like, it has just been used very vicariously this Congress, but this was a very interesting one. I think that I kind of did expect Don Bacon and Thomas Massie, maybe not Kevin Kiley, maybe I would have picked somebody else for the third to vote to, like, allow that language to come to the floor. But I just think that after this came to the floor the first time and people were so unhappy and none of those promises really came through that people exchanged their votes for, that I kind of expected them to tank this one.
Yeah, and I think that the issue is that Speaker Johnson has used a lot of the 119th Congress, which is the Congress we've been in since last January. I think that he's been using the House kind of to temper any sort of political rebellions or preventing his members from taking these, like, politically damaging potentially votes. And so you've seen that with, like, trying to block, like, proxy voting, or, like, trying to block Epstein, or, like, on the healthcare. Like, you've just seen the House avoid as much as possible taking these votes that could make it look like Republicans aren't 100% rubber stamping Trump's agenda. Mm-hmm. And that's something that Democrats have successfully been able to message on since the trifecta came into place, because you're seeing President Trump enact some of these policies, not only under his executive authority, but also sidestepping and, you know, tapping into the legislative branch's authority. And a lot of those things are not becoming popular with Americans. If you look at polling, it shows that a majority of people don't agree with the tariffs, they don't agree with his stuff on immigration. And so with Republicans, that puts you in such a difficult position, because you want to vote with your president, he's your party's leader, you have a trifecta, like, you, that's what it's for. But then at the end of the day, you know, there are things like the tariffs where Republicans just simply, not all of them can get behind it. And I wouldn't even say that some of these members that are voting for it are moderates or centrists all the time. They are just sometimes Republicans who are like, listen, my district is farmers, my district is manufacturing, and these tariffs are not helping. Tariffs are one of those things I think Republicans don't always agree on. Like immigration, Republicans have a pretty staunch, we are 100% all together on immigration. I think tariffs is one of those that the party isn't really going to always find unanimity on. And so when we see these votes on, like, Mexico and Brazil, I think you're going to see the same number of members. Mm-hmm. Maybe a couple will peel off depending if they agree with Mexico, but they don't agree with Brazil. But I think that we will start to see either the same amount or maybe in a little bit larger number.
Yeah, and we could go on and on about that and Congressman Kevin Kiley's vote this week, but we did do a story last weekend on that, so you can go read that so that we don't bore you with that, because we did a very cohesive story on who he is. He is a pretty new member of Congress from California who has kind of lost his district in redistricting and is kind of taking some jumps with these votes and with a couple of other votes this Congress, or a couple of other moves this Congress. So go read that story. But
it's very interesting.
We also touched a little bit on Epstein, and this week has been yet another big week for Epstein stuff. Last Monday, the DOJ opened on semi-unredacted documents. Members who have gone and looked at them have said they are still not completely unredacted, and they have said that they think that the DOJ may have received them redacted. It wasn't redactions that they made, like the FBI may have given the documents to them redacted. So they are not seeing completely and foolproof unredacted documents of everything that the DOJ put out. But in that, those members who went in, starting last Monday before Pam Bondi's hearing last Wednesday, the DOJ was keeping tabs on them and everything that they were searching. Like every time that they would search a name or something, they would tag that page and then put the member's name. They had staff like pretty much looking over their shoulders, is what members told us, and had staff log them in. And so a lot of members are very unhappy with
Happy
this,
is a loose term.
very loose term, with this surveillance from the DOJ. They didn't say yes or say that they could be surveillance in this way. The way that this came out is during the hearing with Attorney General Bondi. She had these binders that the Democrats are calling a burn book. It kind of had insults that she could give back to certain members or notes on what certain members were going to give. And there was one specifically of Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal, and it had her searches. And Democrats are saying that the DOJ opened up these documents on Monday and made these tabs of what these lawmakers were looking into to kind of give the Attorney General some heads up for which specific members were going to be asking about which specific people within the files. So it kind of let her prepare for this hearing more than she could have if the DOJ hadn't opened up these documents. I mean, that's what...
Which that part isn't surprising to me, that she wanted to know what specific members were concerned about because she wanted to have the appropriate response. I mean, you see that with testimonies before Congress all the time. The problem is that these are members of Congress and you are actively surveilling their search history. That is just like not acceptable.
Without their knowledge.
Without their knowledge, too.
Yes.
Like nobody really knew what was happening. We had a couple members tell us like, well, we were there and like there were staffers looking at us, but we thought they were just there to just kind of monitor. Like we knew they were tagging stuff. We weren't really sure what they were doing. But then when she was photographed with this list, and it literally said like Jayapal search history. I mean, that I think was very jarring to some members, and not just Democrats, some Republicans too. I had a lot of Republicans tell me that they didn't really know exactly what I was talking about when I brought it up to them and I asked them for a comment. But a couple of them did say, I don't know specifically what you're talking about, but if the DOJ just broadly is looking at members' search histories without a warrant, that is super concerning. And so this could be another instance where the Republicans especially, and I don't think you'll see a lot of like hard like MAGA Republicans caring so much about this, but like, I don't know, we saw like Chip Roy. Chip Roy is pretty staunchly behind President Trump, but he even did not love the fact that some of his search history could be taken without his consent from the DOJ. So I think that that's going to be something too that right now Democrats are in the minority. They don't really have the power right now, but potentially come November of 2026, they could be in the majority, and that could put Pam Bondi in a hot seat. They're already kind of going after Kristi Noem and other members of Trump's cabinet. Pam Bondi, I think Ted Lieu from California, he is the number 4 House Democrat. He basically said that they want her to resign or they're going to try to impeach her now. So I think kind of how we had talked about last episode where they aren't going full steam ahead to impeach Trump. I think they know that that's kind of a lost cause. The secretaries that they are going after are not really making their cases to keep their jobs when they're doing stuff like this. And I think that that's something that potentially President Trump could get involved with. He hates optics looking bad for him. And I think that that's going to be very difficult for Speaker Johnson and other Republicans to defend if stuff like this keeps happening.
Mm-hmm. I mean, as of now, the president has stood very firmly against the secretaries that Democrats have gone after. We've seen Kristi Noem with DHS. We've seen Lutnick, because his name has appeared in the Epstein files. He faced a lot of scrutiny in a testimony last week. President Trump and Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt stood behind him, and then we saw him stand behind Pam Bondi after the hearing last week. So as of right now, the White House is standing behind these secretaries, but it'll be interesting when or if Democrats regain power in November in the House or the Senate, who they go after. I mean, we have seen Republicans go really hard after Special Councilman Jack Smith, who did surveillance Republican members of the House and the Senate. They looked at their phone documents and records, and Republicans have absolutely slammed Biden's DOJ and Jack Smith over this. They are still having hearings on this, and whenever I asked Democratic members if Republicans should be as up in arms about the surveillance from Trump's DOJ as they were Biden's DOJ, they've said absolutely surveillance of members of Congress is surveillance. But whenever I talked to House Judiciary Chairman Jim Jordan, he kind of said the opposite. He was like, why are we pointing at this whenever Jack Smith was looking at all of our stuff and surveillancing all of our stuff. Like, it seems kind of crazy to me that now Democrats are up in arms about this after their own DOJ did the same to us. And so I do think that this will be a pretty big fight going forward, as we are still looking at Arctic frost stuff now. We did that Arctic frost provision repeal where senators could file lawsuits to get money for or compensation for the surveillance of under the Biden DOJ. So I think that this is going to be a little bit bigger of a deal than people think, or that it kind of led on right whenever it gained traction. Because if you look at Jack Smith, we are a year and a half or a couple years out from that instance or that Biden DOJ, and it is still a major issue.
I think it also just points to the partisanship of Congress, which doesn't everything at this point. But I think it is very interesting that you're seeing somebody like Jim Jordan, who has been very upset about the Arctic frost stuff, not get equally as upset with Pam Bondi. And I think that just shows that a lot of the times that the parties and their members are falling into this trap of, well, you did this, so it's okay to do this. Well, I'm not going to investigate this because 2 years ago you didn't investigate this. And that is something that on the Hill is just oh yeah, well, that's just an everyday Tuesday. But for people who are everyday voters, who are seeing their Congress switch hands and go from Democrat to Republican or Republican to Democrat, and they're seeing just kind of the parties investigating all of these things, but they're not really trying to get down to the root of the problem, which is, for the DOJ, does the DOJ have authority to survey members of Congress? A lot of members of Congress would argue no. I'm sure people at the executive branch and the DOJ would argue yes in some cases. So I think it kind of all of these things that we've talked about kind of tie into this overarching thing of the separation of powers and the executive branch versus the legislative branch. And this is not new. This is not something that just came about because of Biden or came about because of Trump. The legislative branch has been giving away its power to the executive for a long time. But I think that because everything is just so hyper-partisan right now, and we saw so much happen with the Biden administration, so much is happening with the Trump administration, that it's starting to become this massive undertaking that Congress is trying to do, is trying to gain that power back. But with a trifecta and a small majority, I don't think Johnson wants to take any sort of votes in the House that are going to even put a step on a crack to make things worse. And so I think that after the midterm elections, if potentially there's a crack in the GOP trifecta, then we're going to see potentially just how far Democrats want to go to regain some of that legislative power.
Yeah, well, speaking of regaining that legislative power, up next we have a conversation with Congressman Jeff Hurd. Well, welcome, Congressman Hurd, to Capitol Conversations. Happy to have you back on video for another interview this Congress.
It's great to be with you, Lauren.
Well, obviously, some of the big news of the week last week was the big tariff vote that happened. I know that you voted with a handful of Republicans and some Democrats. Can you explain that vote and why you chose to vote for it?
Sure. Well, for me, it comes down to the Constitution. Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution gives Congress authority over tariffs. And I viewed the vote that I took last week as consistent with that constitutional provision. Now, Congress has delegated certain limited powers to the executive branch with respect to trade and tariff issues, but I did not think that they applied in this one specific instance. I looked at the underlying executive order, and I was concerned that if we normalize broad emergency trade powers like this, that we run the risk of having a future Democratic president who's going to use them in ways that we don't like. So there was a fundamental constitutional issue there, but there was also an issue with my district. These tariffs have a negative impact on my district, the agricultural community, the farmers. I heard loud and clear from a number of folks in southern and western Colorado about the negative impact of these tariffs, as well as manufacturers, small and large, including the largest steel rail manufacturer in the United States. So the constitutional issues, the district issues lined up in a way that made this the right vote from my perspective.
And we're going to see potentially some other similar types of bills hit the floor of the House. We're going to see Democrats try to force one on Mexico, tariffs on Brazil, tariffs that were kind of included in that lump Liberation Day order that the president put out. Do you see yourself voting to overturn those as well? You had mentioned kind of just now that you looked at this specific emergency order and you found issues with it. Does those same issues still apply to the ones like for Mexico and Brazil?
Great question. I'm going to have to look at the underlying justifications for each of those. I'm going to take them on a one-off basis, each one evaluating the merits of it. Like I said, I think in certain circumstances, it may be justified. Congress has indeed delegated some authority with respect to these issues, but it depends on what the specific circumstance is. And I say this as somebody that supports and agrees with the president's goals of onshoring, domestic manufacturing again, building more things here in America, manufacturing more things in America, growing more crops here in America, raising larger beef herds here in America. And so I support those goals. I'm 100% aligned. It's just we need to make sure we do it in the right way, a way that's aligned with the Constitution.
I've been watching obviously all of the members who voted for the repeal or voted for the or against the tariff rule and kind of just on the floor and watching people interact. What have your conversations been like with that handful of members that voted to repeal it? And what have your conversations been like with leadership if you've had any on this instance?
Well, I think the individuals that voted with me to repeal the tariff, I think all of us feel strongly about this issue. We believe it's a constitutional issue, separation of powers. It's something important. Congress for decades has given away its power to the executive branch. This is not something new. And so we're committed to making sure that we respect Article 1 and that Congress has its proper role, reasserts its proper role with respect to these important issues. And then talking about the impacts on their districts as well. And I'm not the only one that's experiencing this. And I think if you talk to most members from across the country and in the Republican conference, I think a lot of them would agree that this specific tariff with our largest trading partner in Canada presents serious issues for the people that they represent as well. When it comes to leadership, I had frank discussions with leadership in the lead up to this vote, and I let them know what I was going to be voting and why. And there was some communication in the lead up about what the vote would be actually on the floor, and I approached leadership right before the vote and just confirmed that I was indeed going to be voting to override the tariff implementation, and they understand. They get the constitutional concerns I have, but they also fundamentally understand I need to vote my district also, and that this is the right decision for manufacturers, small and large, and the people that grow our food in Western and Southern Colorado. So they certainly understood why I took the vote and why I'm standing by it.
And we saw after the tariff vote, President Trump put out one of his famous or infamous, depending on how you look at it, Truth Social posts, where he had said that, Republicans who vote to overturn these tariffs are going to suffer consequences in elections and primaries. I have a kind of a two-part question for you. One, on this specifically, what's kind of your reaction to that? And then second, just in general, how do you go about serving your district and, as you said, voting for your constituents, potentially in ways that are different than the Republican leadership is advocating for, with kind of this overarching hovering of President Trump, sometimes using primary threats to get members to kind of fall in line?
Sure. Well, I focus on the things that I can control, and the thing that I can control in this instance is how to best represent my members or my constituents and the people that send me to Congress. Nobody here in Washington, D.C. voted for me or has a vote for me. It's the people of Colorado's third congressional district. Those are the people that I have in mind. Those 740,000 people are my bosses and the ones that I'm accountable to. And at the end of the day, they're the ones that I need to explain my votes, and the folks that are going to hold me accountable are the ones that are back in Colorado. And I say this again as somebody that supports the president's goals of protecting American industry. I just differ on the vehicle, and my job is to defend the Constitution and my district at the same time. And this vote for me was not a partisan vote. This was an economic one, a constitutional one. And when the farmers in my district and when the manufacturers in my district speak up, I listen.
Going off of that, especially as a freshman member or as any member of a party, it is sometimes scary to vote a little bit differently than party leadership or as the majority of the party. Is a vote like that easier whenever you do have a handful of members in your party in your corner or that you're talking with that agree with you? Is that camaraderie that comes with like a smaller group of y'all, is that helpful in taking a scary vote like that?
Yeah, it's definitely it's a tough vote to take, and it can be a little bit lonely. I'd hoped that we might have more members in the Republican conference that joined us on that, but I don't fault anybody for that. Each individual member has to take into account just the complex dynamics of their district and their race, and I understand that. So I don't fault anybody for not joining us. But yeah, it can be tough and tricky, and there are certainly other members when they see your vote up on the board. I had a couple of members ask me, "Did you make a mistake, or was that your need to change your vote?" Uh, and but ultimately, they understood where I was coming from when I explained the reasons, and it is a little bit tough when you're in a small group, but it's okay. One of the things I learned before I came to Congress is if your biggest fear is losing your job, then you're not going to be able to do your job well. And so while I certainly take into account politics and the dynamics of how things look here in Washington, ultimately the deciders are the people that are in Western and Southern Colorado, and they are the ones that are really going to hold me accountable and to whom I need to answer for my votes. And in this case, I'm fighting for my district, and I'm able to look in the eyes of my farmers and my manufacturers and the people I represent and say, hey, even when the vote was tough, I stood up for you, and I'm going to continue to fight for Western and Southern Colorado.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate it.
Happy to be with you. Thank you so much.
Welcome to our Q&A section, our favorite part, and we have a question from Eric, and it is, what is it like to cover a congressional hearing?
It's something.
It's a lot.
It is
uncomfortable sometimes when there's a lot of fighting. You're just kind of sitting there like, oh my goodness.
I would say that the word that I would use is just extremely overstimulating, because you're trying to listen to what's going on in the hearing in live action. You're sitting in the room, you're recording what they're saying so that you can pull quotes, but then you're trying to write a story. Say people get into screaming matches. I'm going to do a short story on that screaming match and then a long story at the end of the hearing of like 5 takeaways from the hearing. But whenever I'm doing those short stories in the middle of the hearing, I'm trying to keep up with what's happening in the hearing while also making sure that my quotes from the fight are right from my recording while also writing. And it's just a lot all at once.
Overly stimulating is a good word. And I think that also what a lot of people don't realize how much work and how much teamwork goes into a hearing, because what you have is the person in the hearing, but when you're recording, all you're hearing is just a bunch of people yelling at each other. So that recording that we have that transcribes everything is almost always awful. So what you have is not only the person in the room hearing live what's happening, watching, then you have somebody in the office, or you have somebody, where we work, like upstairs in our gallery, who is recording it via YouTube and sharing it with the hearing reporter, because then they can literally clearly get the lines because everything's going into a mic. But then also with Pam Bondi's hearing last week, we had a small team of breaking news reporters who were doing a live blog. And then we had a reporter who was in the room offering color. So when you're covering a hearing, there's a lot that goes into it than just being in the room. And I think that YouTube is great because it does, you could, if you're doing a million things that day, you can be writing 3 articles and listening to a hearing. But
I couldn't imagine doing hearings without a live stream.
No, that is probably one of the best inventions ever. Thank you to the House C-SPAN for sure. But also, I think being in the room though and getting that color in real time, it's very surreal. And also, sometimes people that come to testify are so interesting. Like to us, people like the Attorney General or like a secretary is not famous, but to other people, that's pretty cool. Or, there's sometimes actual celebrities from TV shows, or they're artists. You've done your outfit of the day videos. I've interviewed some celebrities. It's very sometimes surreal to be sitting in the same room with them.
Yeah, I think 2 weeks ago I was at a hearing with Kid Rock. I was sitting 5 feet away from him.
And how often do you get to say that?
Yeah, exactly. I feel like hearings are definitely interesting. They are extremely informative. They're sometimes hard to follow with procedure. They have all of this procedure that if you've never watched a hearing before, I remember one of the first things I reported on in Congress was an energy hearing. And I was sitting there and I was like, why are they only speaking in acronyms? They are not speaking English. What is all of this gaveling and all of this procedure and reading amendments? It is extremely confusing, but typically the takeaways of a lot of these hearings are the clips that a lot of people do see on social media. Those are the major stories that come from that. But me personally, I like covering a hearing that we have a live blog for better, because for me it's easier if I'm writing something up quick on a live blog to curate a larger story, because all of my thoughts have already been put down instead of one big jumbled mess that I need to make cohesive by the end of the hearing. So I personally love a hearing live blog. That might be controversial, but
I love a live blog just in general. I think live blogs are so handy. It's so great for people to immediately get the updates as they're coming in, because you're right, like we're writing a story that's the 5 takeaways, but by the time that story comes out, it's probably been like an hour since the hearing. So like everyone does go to that if they're like, oh, like I didn't watch it in real time, like what's the 5 things I missed? Like those articles are so important. But some people really love a hearing. Like some people out there just love to watch the Judiciary Committee do this stuff, and so they will go on the live blogs and they'll read it. And I think it is also funny because you said that that's where the members get all their clips. And it's true, you will see members screaming at each other in these hearings. And then you're watching probably as a, everyday person off the Hill being like, wow, these people hate each other. I kid you not, they will be screaming at each other in this hearing. An hour later, they will be on the floor voting and they'll be hugging or just sitting next to each other chatting. Like it is so funny. Hearings have become very performative. They've become very theatrical. And so a lot of times when they're getting angry, they will get a little snippet their staff puts on social media, and that's their news coverage for the week, because that's what they just keep replaying. I think the Bondi hearing, though, was different. I think that was less Democrats being theatrical, like they can be sometimes, and more actual frustration with the way that the Epstein thing, I think, made her hearing actually a worthwhile watch.
I totally agree on Bondi. I think that, honestly, hearings curate some of the most viral clips from Washington at this point. Like, everyone's seen the bad Bill Bush body. Everyone has seen that, regardless of if you follow politics or not. And I'm sure that there are a handful of others that are like that. And those are some of like the most viral Washington moments in the past few years. And they come from hearings. So hearings are very important for, one, information and committees getting informed, but also, two, for these members' social media clips. But we do have, in a few weeks, we will be covering the Clintons' oversight deposition, so we have that coming up. But that's a wrap this week on Capitol Conversations with Rachel and Lauren.
And as always, make sure to like and subscribe to read the stories we talked about in this episode and other episodes, and always visit washingtonexaminer.com.